I think we're on, Joey. I think
We're
this is
on.
it. I think we did it.
We
The
are
lights are still
on.
on. We are on. Joey, how's it going? How's it going, everybody? Well, welcome aboard to the Segment Podcast. Yeah, I can't believe it's Thursday. It's Friday Eve.
That's right. That means we get to ride bikes and for the weekend coming up.
Yes, I can't wait. I can't wait. The weather's been great. The weather is looking super nice. We had like 70 degrees. I think today. Was it 71?
It was 71. It's perfect weather. The morning was a bit cold. I went out early this morning and it was all foggy and wet, but the dirt was perfect.
Oh, I love it when it's like that, when it just makes the dirt like hero-esque,
Yeah, yeah.
sticky,
Nice and
grippy.
sticky. Perfect grip.
Yes.
Yeah.
Such a perfect grip. And if you slip out and happen to fall, you're staring up at some beautiful blue sky. If
Right,
that
right.
does if that does happen.
I just got a phone
What's
call. I just got a phone call from our good friend Eric Riding Dirty, and he couldn't be happier right now.
why? What is Riding Dirty got or
Well, Riding
do?
Dirty, I know that he put out a post yesterday of a sneak peek of possibly a new bike that he just got, and he called today and he's like, "This is the best bike I've ever had. This is it. This is the best one. This is it. This hands down. I'm getting rid of all my bikes. This is the one."
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so exciting. I'm so happy.
Yeah, I
So
don't know if he's told the crew yet what it is, but yeah, he's stoked, and I'm stoked for him.
that's awesome. I did miss a call from him earlier today too. I'm sure that's what it was about. I'm sure he wanted to gloat. Yes, Trail Pimp's
Yeah,
got it. He's got
yeah.
the SN
Shh.
right here.
Yeah,
Yeah. Trail Pimp may know. Trail Pimp may know.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
he's
it's always
stoked. He said he was clearing all the gaps that he normally doesn't clear, and he was whipping it harder than he's ever whipped any bike. And yeah, he's loving it.
oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Dang, dang. Yeah, that bike is super fun. For
He's
those of
causing
you who
problems
are
over. He's causing problems over here because now I'm looking at new bikes.
Exactly, exactly. Well, speaking of newness to the bike, tonight's guest is Bronson. He is the founder of Be More Bikes. It's the reverse raised stem, and I actually saw him firsthand out on the trails, the YT or dog park trails. We had a Brett Tippy ride. Bronson was out there shredding that his bike, which I think is a YT Jeff C with that RR stem on there. So we will be having Bronson on here shortly. I do see that he did just enter the building, the studio, the virtual studio. I see him down there. We'll have him on here in a second. So I can't wait for you guys to interact with Bronson and learn more about the RR stem. Joey, I was actually watching a pink bike video today on the RR stem, and a lot of it makes total sense
Right.
on the design of it. I just it looks so different, but it does change quite a bit of things for the rider. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to learn more about it. Trail Pimp is saying that stem looks cool. So yeah, so he likes the way that it looks.
Nice. Yeah, it is a good looking product for sure.
Y- yeah, it's
It
definitely got a
stands out. It's definitely different than anything anybody else is riding, but when you see Bronson on it, it's awesome the way I don't know, he just has this movement through the he's always showing it off, and it rides
yeah.
different. It looks like he has way more control.
Right, it does, and he's able to
Yeah.
carve super low to the ground, a lot of
Hard.
good bike
Yeah.
control.
A lot of control.
Makes sense. It makes that back end so much lower because the rise is so big
Yeah.
on that bike. So it'll be cool. Oh, speaking of the
Yeah.
devil,
Yeah. Look
riding
who
dirty in the house with a yo yo yo. Eric, we were just talking about you and the new bike. We're trying not to leak it out there to the public, but somebody here in the audience said that
possibly
you
said it. Yeah.
possibly
Possibly.
allegedly got the decoy SN. It's possible. What do you have to say about that, Mr. Riding Dirty? Do you have anything to say? Trump is asking, how is the SN actually? Joy, before we get the show started tonight, who is the whole shot award winner on tonight's show?
Tonight we have nobody.
Nobody hit the 6 o'clock on the dot, huh?
Not that nobody's on the show. Let me clarify that. There are people in the chats, but nobody hit the 6 o'clock on the dot. But we've got one at 5:58
Oh,
from
that's
Trail Pimp,
close. That's close.
and then someone went over at 6:01.
Oh man, just missed it. Wow,
So
wow.
I mean, the grand prize. What was it? That was the Core 3 SN tonight. Was that the whole shot award?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What a bummer.
nobody got it. That's a
Dang.
bummer. That's a
Yeah,
big time bummer.
that was a good one.
Shoot, that was so close. What's up out to Miami? Johnny Yu is on the show. He says, "Here we are." Yeah, good to see you, Johnny. Good to see you, brother. Well, dude, I haven't had a chance yet to try this RR stem. Joey, have you ridden anything like that, or like a big
No,
sweep or anything like that?
no, nothing like that. I would love to give it a try.
Yeah, let's we're gonna get Bronson here on in a second. Riding Dirty does say that he is going to reveal the decoy SN tonight. So stay tuned to his YouTube channel.
He's gonna reveal what was that? I
Is
think it
he
just
getting it
revealed here on the segment live.
right? You may have. You may have revealed it here. Is that what you mean, Eric? Or are you releasing a video tonight on it?
Oh, too funny.
Uh, all right. So, man, I for those of you too, it's a couple new things too before we get started. Instagram, he says he's going to release it on Instagram. So if you go to Riding Dirty, you'll be able on Instagram, you'll be able to see what he is looking at. Mountain Bike Q&A says, Mark, you're responsible for me being overbiked. Yes. Speaking of new bike day, also, I do hear that Johnny Yu got a YT decoy for Miami. That's
Core
pretty
4, right?
sweet.
Was it Core 4, I believe?
It's either a 4 or a 3.
Yeah.
I know Lauren wanted to make sure that he got a bike that was like perfect and the right color that he liked. Johnny, was it the green one? Was it the seafoam green? Oh yeah, Core 4.
Yeah.
Dude,
Jeez. He's
spare
back on the
no
green
expense.
machine, because remember we talked about that a couple of weeks ago? He was the cool kid
Yeah.
on the street, and now he's cool again.
Yeah, he's cool. He's always the cool kid. What the heck? That's amazing. That's awesome. Yes, it is green. It is green. And yeah, Pimp says Core 429 top shelf. Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Spare no expense on that Core 4. Holy cow. Johnny says, phew, I'm so cool. Oh, and then I recently was at Luisenio Bike Park for the folks that are out there, and boy, that place is pretty amazing. I think we got 23 miles, and we were clocking how far down it is. I think it's over 3+ miles of downhill out
Nice.
there when we're riding those trails. It is insane. The bike park manager, Trevor, took us to the very tippity top. So you know where the shuttle drops us off, Joey, right there at the bottom of
Right.
the little climb to Coyote, or there's Bear, the green trail. Well, they're cutting up a new trail, which is above Coyote, about another mile up. They took us up in a side by side. We took this cool fire road all the way up to the top, and we got to see from, I think he said, am I wrong? Was it 3,800 feet
Wow.
up there? So you're up there. You're up there. You could see the ocean from up there. It's so high up there. And it's a mild descent down to the original shuttle drop off spot. So you
Wow.
descend a mile before you even get to where the shuttles drop off now. So that's coming in the near future. And there was a crew out there already cutting a trail that looked amazing. There's all kinds of rock features that are just natural to the landscape out there that they're going to tie into the trail. It looks cool. It looks cool. So for those of you all who haven't been to Luisenio in a while, you should definitely go back out there because it was so much fun.
Hmm.
So much fun. And they have this new Joe, you saw some of the footage coming out of there. They have
Yeah.
this new section at the hub that's called Stonehenge. tons of jumps. There's that road gap is up there, or the trail
Yeah,
gap is up
that makes
there.
for an amazing photo too.
Yeah, right?
That's a
It's
good photo spot.
such a good photo spot. Of course, the first time we were there, we went there twice within the last Thanksgiving holiday week. First time we were there, we were with Steve Caballero, and we were eyeing it. And first run, you look at things and you kind of go, okay, mental note, I'll be back for that at some point today, as soon as I warm up. But a person like Steve Caballero, you see him looking at it, and you're automatically like, oh shit, we're going straight into it.
Right? Yeah, you see
And
that look
sure
in his
enough,
eyes.
he starts hiking his bike up there. And it's like, all right, we're hitting this. And basically you come down and you do a trail gap, which goes into like a small double, which feeds you into this long swooping berm into these two gaps. One's like they're both step ups, and they're both pretty big hits. As you're coming around the corner, you're flying like Mach 20, it feels like. And your instinct is to brake when you see this big wall in front of you of a lip. But if you do, you'll case it pretty hard. So I brake checked my first attempt. I cased it to the point where when you case hard and your ankle feels it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My front foot was like my ankle was like, we're done.
Yeah, you case it that hard, you're like, "No matter what, I'm going faster next time." Yeah, you're
Exactly.
like, "I don't wanna do that again."
Exactly. I looked over at Cab and Cab was like, "Did you brake check?" I go, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "Don't do that. Don't brake
Yeah.
check." Noted. Oh, man. Right near to saying, "Take me."
Right, let's take them. How about,
Yes.
Trail Pimp says Bike Bling is there. Is Bike Bling at the park now?
Oh, don't forget to hit Bike Bling Bike Shop next time you're at Luisenio. I didn't even know that. I know that they had gear in there, but maybe that's what it was. Trail
Yeah, because
Pimp,
Bike
you are
Bling's I know they're in Escondido, it's a beautiful shop. It's probably the biggest one of the biggest bike shops around here where they have everything in there. It's like
really?
the old school bike shops, what it reminds me of, yeah.
Ah,
I don't know,
got it.
maybe they have a spot out there at the bike park, or if he's just saying hit them up on the way out there. It's on the
Oh, yeah,
way. Yeah, it's
there
on
you
the way.
go. It's
Okay,
on the
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's a good spot for
interesting.
sure, Trail Pimp.
Damn, good call out. Bike Bling. I'll definitely have to stop there on the way because I'm gonna go check it out again for sure. Um, but I still can't believe we took these side by sides up to see the very tippity top, and then he basically just like him and I rail down the mountain. I'm like, we could either ride back with you or we could just ride our bikes down. He's like, yeah, go for it. You'll beat me. And so we jumped on our bikes and headed down. And a mile later, we were finally at Coyote, which was crazy. Um, I see this here. MTV Sheen Queen is on. She says, she did, and she did it too. She also braked. She goes, I braked. I cased hard. She did the same thing, front foot ankle tweak when she cased.
Ugh,
Took myself to timeout. I knew it too because I didn't see the case, but because I was like filming, Cab was kept hitting it over and over again. So I was trying to get in the spot to film Cab. And I looked over and I saw the way that Kim was walking to this big giant boulder to sit down on it. And it's that body language. And I was like, oh no, something happened.
oh, yeah.
So yeah, yeah, she got it pretty good too.
Uh,
I I tell you, man, that those cases are just like Cab said, don't break check. Don't break check.
don't break that.
Don't break check, don't break check. Oh man. With that being said, oh, and definitely she got Queen of the Mountain on that new section. So
Nice.
yeah, there you go. Definitely, definitely. All right, folks. And Joey, what do you think? Should we get Bronson out here on the show?
Yeah, let's bring him on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the founder of Be
He's
More Bikes, and one that will teach us a little bit more about this whole thing, Mr. Bronson. Yo, Bronson.
Howdy.
Hey.
well,
Good to see you, man. Thanks for jumping on the Segment Podcast. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
yeah, my pleasure. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, Joey and I have been in the community. We've seen you out there. We've seen the RR stem. I was telling everybody I saw it on a Pink Bike video. We know that Seth Bike Hacks had a review on it as well. I saw you in person jumping over the legendary Brett Tippy at the dog park trails. That step up is massive.
That was a good time.
And the product really seems to stand out. We have Trail Pimp saying he loves the way it looks. It is something different, but what is it like? Well, first tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you even think about this idea of a product?
So I'm Bronson Moore. I'm 26 as of fairly recently, actually. Um, and I've been designing parts for mountain bikes and mountain bike suspension basically since about 5th or 6th grade. That's been my longtime passion. I really, really love mountain bikes and mountain bike suspension and mountain bike technology. So my main obsession, if you will, is learning about everything I can when it comes to mountain bike technology and everything with that. So around 5th or 6th grade is when I started designing linkage designs for the rear suspension for mountain bikes. And since then, I've been working on my linkage designs. At some point, roughly 5 years ago, let's say, I took a break from focusing on the linkage design and the suspension, which is my main passion, and started focusing more on the geometry to see what geometry I wanted to put my suspension design on. Because once I had my suspension design, got that kind of figured out, mostly for the kinematics that I'm looking for, I then got to figure out what frame geometry I want that to be attached to. And so I started thinking about the geometry for mountain bikes and seeing what things I could potentially go about improving there. So one of the main things that I was looking at on the front end was, if you look at, say, a really slack head tube angle, that moves the front wheel further away from your hands, further out in front. That gives a really nice feel in really steep terrain because you feel less like you're going to flip over the front because the angle is a lot less prone to having you do so. But along with that, a really slack head tube angle has a really floppy steering feel, where it feels like it's trying to like flop side to side really aggressively.
Yeah, like you're riding a chopper.
Yeah. So I saw that as being something that was a bit of a limiting factor in a sense in how slack you can go, that I felt like was limiting geometry as far as how far out the front wheel could be from the hands, for reducing that endo angle from feeling like you're gonna flip over the front end and things of that sort. So initially my thought was literally 2 head tubes. One head tube for your fork, one head tube behind it for your stem and handlebars. And it would just be a traditional stem in that sense. And they would have been connected with like a belt, that way they turn together. But with that idea, there's only so close together that they can be before they intersect. Like if this is the head tube for the fork, this is the head tube for your stem and handlebars, they can't be closer than that because then they intersect. So there's only so close they can be, like logistically. And so for seeing if that would put the front wheel too far out in front, I went for running a 50 millimeter stem in reverse on my mountain bike, just to see, would the front wheel be too far away from my hands in that arrangement? Would that be too far out? And what I found when I did that was that, one, the front wheel was not too far away, and I could still like do a stoppie, for example, just fine, but without the front wheel starting to like skid forward instead because there's not enough weight on it. But more so, I found that one of the big issues I was looking at reducing by going to the 2 head tube situation was a way to reduce how much wheel flop there was in the steering wheel. And I found that the minus 50 millimeter stem actually did that quite well. And along with that, gave some other steering characteristics that were really quite nice. I found I could carve turns really smoothly. I felt I could hold a straight line easier because, again, that reduced floppiness in the steering wheel was helping the wheel just keep a straight line. And along with that, I felt like I could load the front harder without it feeling like it would tuck in.
Yeah, where you get that flop feel.
Yeah, there's a certain point when you're turning on a mountain bike where if you keep turning, the front wheel actually tries to continue turning, and that's that jackknife feeling where it'll suddenly like tuck in, and it's terrifying when that happens.
Totally.
So a lot of times riders avoid that kind of like at all costs by stopping turning at a certain point where they feel like it's going to go for doing that, and then just taking the turn wider or trying to skid the rear wheel around or things like that, as a way of artificially making the turn tighter because they can't continue turning tighter. But yeah, so what I found then with the minus 50 millimeter stem, when you go back along an angle, like if this is the angle of your fork, you're going back along that, you also go lower. Versus if you go forward, you would go a little bit taller. So by running a minus 50 millimeter stem, or 50 millimeter stem just on and reverse normally, you actually end up with a lower front end than you would otherwise.
Interesting.
So just from that standpoint alone, the stem would have needed to be raised up just to get it to the same height as traditional. And so I went for, because I noticed the minus 50 millimeter stem, I did feel like that was too much of a reversed offset. And I felt like if I went a little taller, that would be at least getting me back to the same height. I went for getting a steer tube extender and a shorter stem and continuing to play around with the geometry. And since there was room on the steer tube extender, I figured why not try even taller? And so I experimented over the course of, from then about 3 years, testing anything from 70 millimeters forward offset to 70 millimeters reversed offset for the stem length, from below a traditional height to about 80 millimeters taller than that version that I have as my background.
That's 50?
That one, so 80 millimeters taller than that I've tested.
Wow.
So this one, the dimensions of it is it's 150 millimeter rise from the bottom of the base there to the center of the bar up there. And it's a minus 15 millimeter offset. So your hands are behind the steering axis a little bit with the reversed offset. And when you combine it with the back sweep of the bars, also bringing your hands back some, your hands end up roughly, if you're looking at like the center of the grips, roughly like 40 millimeters behind the steering axis. So they're quite like notably behind.
Interesting. Yeah, we're looking at a clip right now on your Instagram. It's a side profile shot. You can definitely see how that is reversed back there, how it's behind. Is this in this version, is this the one that you're talking of right now?
So this is the shorter version that you're seeing on screen right now in that video. So I have two heights currently. I originally started with the 150 millimeter rise version as the one that I was offering to as the first product that I offered. And now I offer two heights. So I also have a 90 millimeter rise. So I've actually got them both with me here. So this is the 150 millimeter rise version. So again, from the bottom of the base here to the center of the bar is 150 millimeters.
Okay.
And then from the center of the steer tube there to the center of the bar is 15 millimeters reversed.
Okay.
It's got little R's on the side because it's raised, reversed.
Oh, nice. That's a slick design. I love it. I love it. So okay. Yeah. This is the other one?
Yeah, so this is the 90 millimeter version. So it's 90 millimeter rise from the bottom of the base here to, again, that center of the bar there. And then same thing, minus 15 millimeter reversed offset.
Wow.
And then it also has the little R's.
Yeah, that's cool design. When it came to the negative 15, that's just kind of the sweet spot that you found being back behind the bars.
Yeah, that's the offset that I came to over that roughly 3 years testing the 70 forward to 70 reversed. I came to minus 15 reversed.
Gotcha.
I basically tested all the offsets in between there. I tested those offsets across 9 different bikes of different geometries and frame sizes, lots of different head tube angles from like 59 up to 65, or no, 66. Yeah, 59 up to 66 degree head tube angles for with the stem. Reaches from 410 up to 515. Chainstay lengths from 430 up to 462.
Whew.
And wheel sizes 29, 27 and a half, and 26, both front and rear, or 29, 27 and a half, 29, 26 as mullets.
Dang, you've tested a lot. I holy cow. I mean, I haven't yet
Yeah,
tried.
3 years. I had to fill those 3 years with something.
Right, right. It's
Yeah.
it's very cool because I already know MTB mountain bike community saying MTB science.
Right.
I know the feeling I get just from going from a 29er to a mullet, and I love the feeling of the mullet. Like for like what you said, when I'm going downhill, I don't feel like I'm gonna flop over the bars. Also, I like how slacked out it feels. You know, I feel like being able to carve a little bit more. That back tire being smaller, I feel like I can play around with it a little bit more. But this seems like that feeling on steroids.
Yeah, it takes it, I'd say, even to another level.
Dang.
Along with that too. So when it comes to the handling with the reversed offset, one of the big things to me is that it really helps to improve the cornering feel. Like that's, to me, that's the number one benefit of the stem, actually, is cornering, especially flat turns and in loose terrain, because
Okay.
the bike carves a lot better. And the reason for that, I can actually show you here. I did a little bit of a drawing on the whiteboard behind me. Hopefully this works.
Let's see.
It comes through clear.
Give you a full shot here.
So we're looking at the, it might be a little hard to see the colors. See them that well. But on the whiteboard here, I went for making it so that you can see the colors a little bit there.
Yeah, I can see that green, red, and blue. Yeah, that looks great.
So most people, when it comes to like mountain bike steering geometry, are fairly familiar with the trail measurement. So that's if you do a straight line down through the steering axis and the angle of the fork. So this little red dotted line comes down to a certain point where it's going to contact the ground.
Okay.
And if you do a straight line down through from the axle to the contact patch of the tire, that's going to contact the ground at a certain point.
Okay.
And that distance between the two of them is called the trail measurement. So in steering geometry, that's a very common thing. You'll see that in motorcycle steering dynamics. You'll see that in mountain bike steering dynamics, any kind of things of that sort, you'll see that. Basically, if this is your steering axis, this is the contact patch of the tire trailing behind it, then this is going to, when the bike pushes forward, let's say that your wheel is turned out from this point, it's going to self-align back into straight. Does that make sense?
Shoo, I think it does. I've seen you
It's
do
kinda
it in
like a
action.
shopping cart wheel. If you look at like the wheel on a shopping cart, when it's facing a certain direction, it'll self-align straight. When it's facing the opposite direction, it'll turn itself back around to be straight.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
It's the same principle. Yeah. So with this is like when the shopping cart wheel is going to self-align to continue straight. Anytime you turn away from straight, it's going to self-align back to straight when you push the cart forward. It's the same thing here. There's this distance here that's almost working like a little lever from this point. Like if you think almost like of this right here is like a pivot point, and this being like a lever extending back from it. If this is turned out this way, it's further forward. If it's back this way, it's further back. If I push, like if this one being the steering axis and this one being the wheel, if I push this forward, it's going to try to straighten out like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. With the shopping cart analogy, that I can understand that. Yeah.
So in the same sense, the shopping cart wheel, this would be the wheel extended out. This would be the steering axis it's on. You push that cart forward from here, or you pull it from there, and it's going to pull that back around. So I like to conceptualize it more as that it's leading it. I feel like thinking about it as that it's trailing behind is a bit counterintuitive, because this point's connected to the ground and you're pulling this. Almost like even if you're like pulling a string, it's always going to pull straight. And if you had like a weight at the end of the string, that's what you're pulling against, that's going to try to like continue into any direction you pull it. So you're leading that string, or you can think of it even as if you're like pulling a trailer. If your hands are the trailer, this would be like your hands at the trailer. And then this would be the trailer itself, you can say.
Okay.
The trailer is out of line from you, like it's turned away from you, and you start pulling it straight, it's gonna pull straight along with you. If you try to push that trailer, it's gonna try to push and turn away. So like if you're like reversing a vehicle that has a trailer on it, the trailer tries to like turn away from the direction that you're trying to drive.
Okay.
If you're trying to drive forward with the trailer trails behind you, hence the name trail.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Damn. That is that. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. We have some questions in the chat too, but Mountain Bike Q&A says, "Are we going to be tested after the podcast? Because I'm gonna fail." He says. Let's see. People were asking. Tread Monster's asking. This was the stem featured by Seth Burn
Yep.
Peak, correct?
That's
Yep.
me.
Yeah.
Or that's my stem, I should say.
Yeah. Tropip is asking, how about seat tube length?
So does he mean as far as seat tube lengths that I've tested, or seat tube lengths interacting with the stem?
I think he's asking about tested, but
if he's meaning tested, I've I guess seat tube lengths from roughly like 430 up to 500, but really that's just a clearance thing, depending on how low I can get the dropper post. But as far as interaction to the stem, no difference. You're on the exact same seat tube height as you always would. Your seat height for climbing would be the same. Your seat height when you're descending to get it down low would be the same. Your bar height relative to your seat will be different. So your bars, let's say if you're a really tall rider and your seat's all the way up here and your bars are like down here, it's going to help to bring them more up to about in line with the seat or a little above. I'd say having the bars a little above your seat in your climbing position is a good place to be, or about in line with the seat in your climbing position is a pretty good place to be. I wouldn't really recommend being that much lower, because you just end up being really stretched out and hunched over.
Right. Yeah, that would not be comfortable, especially on a long time.
Well, that's the way it is for really tall riders almost always, because bikes don't scale proportionally. So sizes large, extra large, extra, extra large, they mostly just get taller on the seat. They typically don't really get any taller on the front end. And so they get proportionally a much lower front end.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Mountain Bike Q&A is asking, do you have to stand up higher, or can you get down easily for cornering? He's wondering. So
the position of your body changes a little bit, I would say, when you're cornering. I wouldn't say so much necessarily that you're standing taller. So like if you look in this video, yeah, this is perfect. I'd say more so I get more bend in my arms than it is that I end up being that much taller. So if you look at this video here, like both arms, I have a little bit of bend in. Mostly my my outside arm I have more bend in. But more so, the thing that's special with the stem, which I'm helping to showcase here in this, is the lean angle.
Jeez, you are almost pedal to the ground.
Yeah.
So
that's insane.
With the stem, one of the big things with the reversed offset that's helpful when it comes to cornering characteristics is that additional lean angle it allows you to get. So since the stem is going back instead of moving forward from your steering axis, that means, let's say I'm doing a left-hand turn. So I'm going to turn my bars to the left, right? With a forward offset, they're going to move to the left and in. With a reversed offset, going to turn to the left, but they're going to move out. Now, instead of it being so much a situation where they move out like this, what actually happens is I just turn just as I normally would, but the bike drops in further. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I saw you do that in the parking lot at YT. You were
Yeah.
turning flat like that, and just you can hear there was a ton of tension on the bike because you were really getting into it, really leaning into it.
Yeah,
And
I load the rear of the bike a lot when I'm cornering really tight. In general, with mountain bikes, when you're cornering, typically the rear tire sees more load. That's part of why we run higher tire pressures on the rear. That's part of why someone burps the tire when they're cornering. It tends to be the rear tire, even with the higher tire pressure. Most of the time, most things that we're doing on the bike, we load the rear more than we load the front. In
yes,
cornering, I'd say sometimes even more so. We'll tend to load the rear of the bike more than the front. You can see here when I'm doing this, I keep my hands really light when I'm cornering. I lean the bike a lot because when the bike is leaned over, it's going to carve a tighter turn for a given like rotation of the bars. You don't have to turn your hands as much as steering. You more lean and the bike will actually turn tighter.
wow.
And when I'm really loading the rear, I can kind of pull the front around the turn a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that in this example. I can see how the front wheel is lifting up when you're transitioning to the next turn.
Yeah. I even like to kind of think of it as like if we think about the front wheel lifting on the bike, like let's say this is the front wheel lifting for my hand here. If I have this leaned over, that process of lifting around like that is basically going around a turn. Like if I think about like, let's say we're looking at this from a top view and this is the turn that you're going around. The front wheel lifting is turning when the bike is leaned, in a sense, as far as like lifting along that same axis of the bike. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Which is, yeah. Oh, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. So when I'm cornering, especially when I'm going for like a really tight corner, I actually get to a point where I'm pulling the front around the turn and I'm pushing through my feet. So around this turn right here, I push through my feet and I pull on the bars with my hands a little bit at the end of the turn. And that gets the bike turned around really quickly and really tight. And also helps to keep your front wheel from pushing and washing out because you're pulling it instead of pushing it in the direction you would want it to wash out.
Right.
One of the things you'll hear often, like load the front and like trust your front tire and really load the front. That technique,
scary.
Yeah, that technique. If your front wheel loses traction and you're actively pushing on it, which is actually more prone to doing if you're pushing it to push out, your front wheel pushes, you just go with it immediately. And that's how you wash out the front. It's just like suddenly you've just dropped away. And it's really scary when that happens.
Yeah, you're looking up at the sky. What happened? What happened to me?
So with the RR stem, I stay further back. So the bottom panel in this video here is with the RR stem. You can see how much further back I am. And how even at the end of the video, my front wheel, I lift it up a little bit because I'm pulling it around the turn. You can also see here the lean angle difference between the two.
Yeah, it's deeper. It's deeper with the RR. For
so
sure.
On this, I actually, it's literally the same bike. I have both bars with two different stems on the bike.
Okay.
So I have one bar in front with a forward offset stem. And then I also have the reversed offset stem underneath it there.
Wow.
So the ones where the bike is leaned over further are the ones with the RR stem. The ones where the bike is more upright are with a traditional stem.
Got it. So in this case, it's the bottom one that has the RR stem. The top one is the traditional stem. For the folks that are listening on iTunes and Spotify, we're looking at BeMoreBikes Instagram page, and he's got plenty of examples of how this product helps the bike perform. I definitely like the confidence of being on the back tire more than trusting that front tire. Right, Joey?
Yeah, when you're like, there's To an extent, loading your front tire can work, but I wouldn't say that it's really the best way for cornering. You really want to be pretty light on your hands. You want to keep all your weight through your feet. When you're doing that, you're gonna get weight on the front tire because the bottom, like your feet at the bottom bracket, are not at the rear axle. They're somewhere distributed between the wheels.
Right.
So any weight on the bottom bracket puts weight on both front and rear wheels. The
Also
more weight
gets
you put on the bottom bracket, the more you load down on it, the more weight you get on both wheels.
Like you said, pushing through your feet in those corners. Got it. A couple more questions here. It says Mountain Bike Q&A is asking, how long did it take you to get used to this tall stem? Did it take some time?
Not really, not long at all. So I would say that my riding style has changed some over the time of developing it. So for example, I used to be really aggressively over the front style rider. I even had my brake levers were like almost vertical because I was so much over the front because I thought that's how you needed to be.
Right.
What we're saying, get over the front and
I may have
load
had
the
mine
front.
just like that for the same reason. I'm trying to force myself to get over the front.
Yeah, that really aggressive over the front style. I'd say like it only works as far as your athletic ability allows your reaction time to be, because that style doesn't really give good handling of the bike. And if your athletic ability is high enough and your reflexes are fast enough, you can make do with that just by being like, I'm just going to force it to do anything I want it to do kind of thing. But why be so aggressive and forcing while you're compromising the handling of the bike, when instead you can ride calmer with less energy and have better handling by not riding that aggressively and riding more calm and controlled.
Yeah.
In a way where you're more loading through the feet, keeping your hands light, and letting the bike work as it's supposed to and as it's intended, where really letting it lean into the turns, because the bike turns the best when it's leaned. It turns by itself when it's leaned. Like even if you just lean the bike over, the handlebars turn in. They do that automatically on their own.
Right.
That is a very nice aspect to it. You know, when you can just lean the bike and the bike does its thing, your weight's more centered above the bike versus like totally leaned into it, hoping that everything sticks and you don't end up hitting the ground. Yeah.
And so
Definitely.
initially, when I first was developing, I was definitely more aggressively over the front. And as I started working on it, I actually quite liked the stem for that style because the front end had less floppiness in the steering feel. So I felt like I could load it more aggressively. And because it was tall, I felt like I could just kind of lean against the bars in a sense, because there was something to lean against with them. That's like that angle that I'm getting to lean against versus them being lower and I'm more on top of them. If I'm trying to like lean against it, I'm more feeling like I'm gonna tip forward. I actually had something to support me to lean against. So I quite liked it initially for that riding style. But as I rode it more, I found that I could really get really nice cornering feels when I'm really just loading through my feet, or even pulling the front around. In some cases where I'm actively like pumping the bike around a turn, push through the feet and pull the front around, and it really just whips around when you do that really nicely. But when it comes to how long it takes to get used to the stem, most of my customers first run, even they're already pretty used to it. It honestly doesn't take that long to get used to. I have lots of customers where first run they've set a PR by multiple seconds on trails they've been riding for years.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy to me, honestly, how quickly people tend to get used to it, because it's a very big change. But the big change that it is more so a big change towards easier and calmer handling. So like one of the things, for example, I like to say with it is that when you're riding with the stem, it's not fundamentally changing the technique you should be using. as far as if you're using good technique, as is the way that's suggested by most mountain bike coaches. A lot of mountain bike coaches advise weight through your feet, hands light, hinge down at your hips, so you get good bend in your arms.
Mm-hmm.
Good bend in your arms gives you good range of motion and good suspension in your arms versus being more like arms locked, no control. And when you're cornering, lean the bike a lot more than you. This helps you do all those things easier. The technique you're using of leaning the bike in more, you do that same technique. This just lets the bike lean even further when you do that same lean of your body and same like movement of your hands. The bike will be leaned over further. When you're in your attack position, getting all your weight through your feet is easier because it's a little more upright. Getting good bend in your arms is easier because they're closer to you. Instead of you coming down, hinging down really deep to meet the bars, in a sense, the bars are coming up to meet you. So all those things are the same things you're already doing, but now easier.
Wow. Wow. Dang. It's crazy to think that 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 geometry change, does all those things, because I feel like a lot of the bikes geometry is made that way. Like you have a sweep up on the handlebars, and this is just instead of 35, it's like you got the 90 or the 150. Um, you have the MX, which is slacking everything out, and this is doing it with the way the bars feel. So it's
Yeah.
like changing the geometry of the bike without paying thousands of dollars for a new bike.
In a sense, like I like to kind of think of it as like looking at the RR stem as just a stem change is missing the point. It's a whole change to the geometry of the bike, a whole different ride feel that you're going for. So I liken it to being more similar to a new frame with radically different geometry that you can't otherwise get because you can't get that geometry on any frame.
Right.
At least currently. I'm working on that. But you're getting a whole different ride with a whole different handling, more similar to a new bike with a completely different geometry. Versus if you're just doing a stem change, typically, if you're doing a stem change from a 35 millimeter stem from one company to a 35 millimeter stem from another company, the handling is going to be basically the exact same. Geometry is the exact same. The ride feel will be in large part the exact same. Maybe one might be a little bit stiffer or something like that, but the pretty minimal differences there. Like stem to stem from different companies pretty much ride the same, especially if you're looking at the same dimension. If you're switching from, say, a 40 to a 35 millimeter stem, it's going to handle a little differently, but again, you're not getting that much of a change.
Yeah.
With this, it's a very big change. Like if I look at the angle between the front axle here and here versus the angle with the RR stem, that's more similar to a much slacker head tube angle. So if you're looking at a bike with a 64-degree head tube angle and you go for running the stem, your hand to front axle position is comparable to about a 58 to 59-degree head tube angle.
Okay.
So something that would be a lot slacker. If you look at a downhill bike, that'd be about 63 to 62 degrees.
Shoo,
So
that's pretty
it's
slack.
slacker than a downhill bike as far as the effective angle between your hands and the front axle and your hands.
To your
But
hands. Yeah.
you don't get the floppy steering feel.
Right. Right. You get the stability of having your offset hands back.
Yeah. So like the floppiness in the steering feel, I don't know how well this will translate. We'll see, but I can try to explain it. So on this one, we were saying the trail measurement here to here. And then if you do a straight line down from where your hands are up there,
Okay. Yeah.
in line with the steering axis, that'll be basically the point that you're steering from. So the contact patch of your tires here, that's what's in contact with the ground. You are offset away from that. So you're about here on a traditional stem, let's say, and then this is your steering axis. The further you are out along from this point, the more floppy your steering feel.
Okay.
Whether that be your trail measurement is longer, further out, that gives a floppier steering feel, or your hands are further offset forward, that gives a floppier steering feel. You can look at that kind of here. This is that like center of the tire contact patch there.
Okay.
This is basically the amount you're flopping side to side when you're turning from here on a traditional stem. And then this is where the steering axis is turning around from there. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
So if we look at the RR stem here, your hands behind the steering axis are coming down here, still in front of the contact patch of the tire.
But it shortens it.
Yeah, you still have a self-centering force at the bars. It's not going to suddenly try to turn on you. It's still self-centering in the same way because they're still in front of the contact patch of the tire, just as you were before. But it's substantially shorter distance there. Subsequently, then, when you're turning from that point on the tire there, it's not flopping side to side nearly as much.
Wow.
Substantially less versus a whole lot more.
Wow. So you get the slack that you still want and need without that floppiness feeling, which is cool.
Typically, you don't see downhill bikes really go any slacker than about 62 degrees, because if you go any slacker than that, really, you start getting to where the front end is harder to control, and that steering characteristic starts being more of a problem. I mean, it's already can be a little hard to control the floppiness in the steering feel, even on a 64 or 65 degree head tube angle, let alone going down to a downhill bike. With this, you're getting an even slacker effective angle between your front axle and your hands. So you're less prone to flipping over the front, even more so than you are on a downhill bike, but without the floppy steering feel. It's actually less floppy of a steering feel even than the bike at a stock 64 degree head tube angle.
Dang.
Wow.
That's nuts. Couple questions here for you. Teddy Parker's asking, not sure about correct, but given the zero offset as it's directly in line with the steerer, less offset may be better or more normal. But Bronson can talk about why being behind the axle is good. Oh, I think you just actually displayed that.
Yeah.
In a sense, yeah. So some people have the theory of being directly in line with the steering axis. The reasoning being basically the thinking that if you're directly in line with the steering axis, then when you turn the bars, you're turning from a direct point, versus if you're in front, you're translating side to side to some amount. And if you're behind, you'd be translating side to side to some amount. So the thinking being that if you're directly in line, you're turning exactly from a single point, that would feel better. The problem, in a sense, is that you don't actually turn from the steering axis when you turn the bars, because that's a floating point in space that's moving around. You turn from the contact patch of the tire, because that's what's actually in contact with the ground, and that's what's pivoting from. So your bars are turning from the contact patch of the tire.
That makes sense.
So if they're turning from the contact patch of the tire way out in front here, that's more translating side-to-side motion and more floppy side-to-side feel.
Got it. Got it.
You're still in front with the RR stem, just by a much smaller amount, so you're much closer to it. Because of that now, that side-to-side flopping feel is maybe like this instead of like this. In a sense.
Gotcha. Teddy Parker is saying, setting up a demo with Bronson as we speak. I am intrigued as someone who rides the 80 millimeter high sides, he says.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had multiple customers who previously were on taller rise bars who prefer the feeling of riding with the RR stem. So one of the things that's kind of a common misconception, people see it. The first thing that's really easy to notice is it's tall. So they'll look at this and they'll think must be the same as a riser bar. It's just a tall stem instead of a tall bar. Not the same. So if I had a tall bar, let's say in front of the head of the, like this is like where your head tube is, because that's basically where it would be. Traditionally, a stem would be about right here, because the bar can't intersect the steerer tube here. So they can only go so short on a traditional stem. You can only go about 32 millimeters, because if we think about your head tube, your steer tube is what, 28 point something. But let's, for easy numbers, let's say it's 30. Your bar is 31.8. For easy numbers, let's just say it's 30. So we're looking at 30 and 30. You can't go any shorter than the middle points between them, 15 and 15, 30 millimeters before they're intersecting. So the shortest stem you can have with a traditional stem is 30 millimeters, roughly, let's say. So if we're in front here, from the center line here of the steer tube, 30 millimeters, and then we're going for running a taller rise bar, let's say even one that's the same height, that's going to be going up here. So now this is the center of your bars, basically, versus this is the center of your bars. This is a substantial difference.
Yeah.
You go on the angle of the fork, even, especially if your rise is vertical, that's a very substantial difference as far as where you're ending up.
Interesting.
Even if you have your bars rolled in line with the head tube, it's a smaller difference, but still is a notable difference where you're going from in front of the steering axis some amount to actively behind it. And that being behind the steering axis again, that's the big thing with the stem. That's why I call it a raised reverse stem. Because it's a raised version of my reverse stem philosophy. I have a lesser raised version of my same reversed stem philosophy. The reversed part of it is the main thing. That's what's special about it. That's what gives all of these changes to the steering dynamics, the steering characteristics. That's what gives the better cornering feel. That's what gives the reduced wheel flop. That's what gives the reduced likelihood of the front trying to tuck in suddenly in tighter turns, and allows you actually to keep turning tighter in tighter turns. Along with that, leaning the bike over more also helps you to turn tighter. And that's what allows the front end to be further behind the front axle, more similar to like a slacker head tube angle, but without actually having the downsides of a slacker head tube angle.
Interesting. Good question here by Mountain Bike Q&A. He's asking, like, all this sounds great, but how has the industry, he's asking, so how hard is it to get the industry to understand this when you're talking to the industry?
Very, very hard. This is not an easy product to sell. It's a very hard product to sell, at least for me, because I'm not a business person. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a designer. I design stuff. I feel like I design things that work pretty well, and hopefully that translates to my customers. In large part, I would say it does, because all of the customers that I've talked to have been very, very happy with it. I have even a lot of repeat customers where they've gone and bought another 1, 2, or 3 stems for their other bikes because they don't want to keep using a traditional stem on any bike anymore. So they get one for their e-bike, they get one for their mountain bike, they get one for their enduro bike, they get one for their trail bike. I even have a couple people who've gotten them for their downhill bikes and then gotten a longer steer tube on their crown, because I don't have a direct mount version yet, because I don't have a downhill bike currently, because I don't really need one, because I get better geometry than a downhill bike with this for downhill. I just have less travel, which isn't really a problem for what I'm riding. But anyways, yeah, it's hard to get people to understand this when they're just seeing it online. It's not that hard to get people to understand it when they try it, because people tend to like it when they try it. A lot of times when I have people do demos, they tend to like it a lot. A decent amount of my demos even translate into sales because they really like the stem and then they want to buy one. But when someone's just seeing this online, this doesn't really make sense. It looks weird. It's counterintuitive. It's not something someone's already looking for, really. It's expensive. It's quite a bit more expensive than the part it replaces. And in the same way as it itself kind of looks weird, it's going to make your bike relative to what you're used to look weird, and then people might make fun of you. So it's not an easy sell. That said, it does work really well. Getting the customer base in the mountain bike industry to understand it, and also understand it as being that this is more than just a stem change and should be treated as such. So, for example, one of the things with it, the setup that you have on your bike, when you have it set up for a traditional stem, when you're switching to this, depending on the setup that you have and the riding style you have, you may need to change your setup entirely. So your fork pressure, your shock pressure, your front tire pressure, your rear tire pressure, your brake angles, your bar roll, your seat position, all of these things, depending on where they're starting from, may need to change to get the best ride characteristic from it. Because in the same way as I was saying earlier, it's much more similar to getting a new bike with a different geometry. And so treating it, in a sense, when you put this on, as that you're starting from scratch with a new bike, is much more so the way that you should go about conceptualizing it, in a sense, when you're going for setting it up. Because your body's in a completely different position. As such, it's interacting with your bike in a completely different way.
Yeah.
As such, the setup you were using may not work that well anymore with the stem now that it's installed. Now, that's not a huge deal. I will say, albeit, if you're a rider who's not looking for improving the performance of your bike, or are not looking like you're not really much of a tinkerer or someone who likes to like set up their bike and stuff, this may not be the first product for you. I mean, if you are that person, feel free to talk to me. I love working directly with my customers and working on getting them the best setup that they can get. I have lots of suggestions of things that they can start with for moving down the right path. But if you're not open to going for making tweaks and taking the time to learn it and understand it, this may not be the product for you, and I'd say that's fair. That said, the changes to setup, they're not hard changes to make. I'd say when you understand how it works, they're pretty straightforward and pretty intuitive. Along with that, adjusting to the ride typically doesn't take that long. Like I'm not gonna go for sure on the record and say first ride you'll be faster. You might be. A lot of my customers are, but I'd say give it a good 3 rides, and your third ride, I'll say, roughly, it'll probably be where you're starting to really feel a lot of the benefits. Because some things can take a little bit of time to get used to. Usually not that long, but I won't discount that there can be an adjustment period depending on the riding style you're coming from. Oh, this is a race I won.
Yeah, some race footage of you on it, coming down the mountain right there, South Ridge.
So I had never won any races before designing the stem. I was, for expert men, which is the class that I race for downhill, I was always below top 10. I think my best placement before the stem was like 14th or 13th, something like that.
Okay.
My first race coming back with the stem, I was on the podium.
Oh.
Albeit I will say there was a little gap between the last race then and the first race. But if you look at my times relative to other riders who I know my times were a lot faster. I was pretty consistently on the podium so long as I didn't have a mechanical, because I have had definitely some bad luck when it comes to derailleurs. The bike that I had, the derailleur was not great, and so my chain would fall off pretty often.
Oh, that's the worst, man. You're trying to pedal.
Yeah, exactly. When you're in a race run and your chain falls off, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, Aaron Gwynn in it.
Yeah, and like you can do that up to a point, but when you get to sections that are very pedally, like they have at Southridge, especially the wall, it's really hard to do that without a chain. Or doing enduro races, even too. Some of those where like my chain falling off during a stage. But other than mechanical issues, I was typically on the podium for most of the races that I did, and I even took some wins, and that never happened for the stem, because with the stem I'm a lot faster. I have a lot more control, and I'm a lot more confident and comfortable as I'm riding.
That makes a
I
big
actually have done a lot of time testing of my own. There's a trail that I know by my house. I can typically run to run. I'm like milliseconds off from each other. At the largest gaps, I might be like 2 seconds, or like 1 to 2 seconds plus or minus from a given time.
What do you think it'll take, Bronson, for the industry to really pay attention to this new design? Is it something like Teddy Parker is saying, like you get a high level racer using it at a
I'd,
large venue? Is
I'd
that
say that's definitely a part of it. So like for me, I race at enduro level. Sorry, I race at expert level. So that's one below pro. I do decent in there. I'm not that slow of a rider, but I'm not a pro level rider. I make no claims to be a pro level rider either. Most of the pro riders that I've talked to are riders who are at a like notably higher level than I am. Either have sponsors that conflict, where they're not allowed to run it, or they're not open to trying it and they just want to keep with their existing training regime. It's kind of funny actually with that. Racers can tend to be what's the word? Pretty conservative when it comes to their setups.
Okay.
When it comes to changes.
Right.
So if there's a setup that they're used to running, any change away from that setup, I believe like the mentality is basically like any change away from that setup is something new to learn. Learning something new takes time. They don't really have time to go down the wrong route. And so if they're trying something new and that slows them down, especially if it's in a race run, that's a risk that's really hard to take, because if they go any slower, that places down. They're not doing as well in the race, and that is not good. So they'll tend to stick with what they're used to, unless there's something actively that they see as an issue to change. And typically, even those active changes they'll like, let's say, it might be a situation where the rider's feeling like, oh, I feel like I don't have good traction here. I'll make one click change on my suspension, or I'll adjust my tire pressure by 1 or 2 psi. Like they make small changes typically.
Yeah, not outside the box.
That they're used to. Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's something they're used to, then allows that to stay consistent things. So then they can focus on their training in the gym or whatever, or riding, to just get stronger, get faster, get stronger, get faster. And that's kind of how they tend to go. There are some racers who are very interested in what can I try to see if it'll make me faster. But again, there's the problem of if they have sponsors that conflict where they're not allowed to try certain things, then they can't try it. And sometimes even it can be a situation where they may have some level of freedom in being able to run other components, but other components that aren't that big a change away from what the bike is already running. So for example, it might be a situation where, let's say the stock bike is full 29. The racer is curious about running a 27.5-inch wheel in the rear, and maybe a different link to go for that change. Some companies are going to be open to making that change and going for allowing them to make that change. Some companies may not be open to that change because they'll see it as you're taking away from the stock build in a sense. So anything that's taking away from the way the bike is stock kind of undermines that stock build as being good in a sense. So then the customer may look at that all the riders are running the bike differently than the stock build. So I'll either wait for their version to come out, and then I'm not going to buy a bike for now, and then the company's losing sales because they're not selling bikes at the time. Or I'll buy another bike that's doing those things that I'm curious about. So it's a hard game when it comes to being a bike company and staying relevant and making sure that your current product is still selling while you're working on the next product, and getting your racers and riders to ride something that works well, but also isn't taking away from what you currently have too much or showing too differently. And like even I know one of the things like Dakota Norton's brought up pretty often for running his tall bars. From what I understand, like it took a while of him like asking the company that he rides for to make a taller rise bar for him, and then even still, they were like you can hear in I've listened to some podcasts that he's talked about it, like him getting to convince them to let him do this and trust him that this will be good because it's making the bike look a lot different, and it's making the bike it's going to make the bike handle a lot different than what they were planning and expecting. Even just going for that taller rise bar, from what he's said in podcasts, from what I've heard, it sounds like he had a bit of trouble getting them to kind of trust him on that.
Wow.
In a way,
somebody at that level.
Like just trust me that it will work. Let me run my taller bars and I'll show you the results. Basically, it was from what I heard, that was kind of like what he was saying with that, or with Intense getting to run the taller, more and more spacers under the stem. He was going for doing that in part because he couldn't have a taller rise bar, and he stopped at a certain point and that's because his sponsor didn't make a taller rise bar, and he can't go for running another company's bar that is tall like that because that's a different company. And so the running the whole bunch of spacers under his stem, but then he was getting to a point where he was worried about the bolts being strong enough, because it's just kind of the bolt that's holding all the spacers, and the bolt might shear or things like that. And so there being a limiting point where he wouldn't go taller on that because he can't get it taller on the frame. He can't get the spacers taller without potentially risking the bolts failing, and he can't run a taller rise bar because they don't make a taller rise bar for him currently, and they I guess weren't willing to at the time, and switched to another company, and then was able to run the taller bars after convincing them to let him do that. And if he's having trouble kind of getting that, like, I'm not even the company he's sponsored by. So getting to run my product is an additional hurdle to get over, and I haven't yet at least figured out how to get over that, either conservativeness or lack of allowance, I guess you could say.
Can you catch the athletes like before the season hits, when they're just training and getting up and going, because they've got access to their Instagrams and their followers that way?
So, to some extent, that's something I'm working on getting towards doing. I will say I don't know what I don't know, and so I'm still learning, and all of this is new to me. As such, I'm working on finding I'm still working on finding the best way to go for getting another athlete to get on it.
Trail Pimp is saying, forget about the racers. You should get Dylan Stark to test it at Summit. Get the free riders in.
Stark is the rider who rides for YT, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
So I asked him, and he didn't want to try it.
Gotcha.
So that's the same thing again, going back to there's a hurdle of getting people to be interested and open to trying it in the first place. Then there's the side of whether or not they're allowed to. And so far, at least, it's been either one or the other that's in the way for riders I've talked to.
That's challenging. That
Yeah.
is challenging. Dang. Mountain Bike Q&A is saying, well, Seth was a good start. It's a good
For sure,
start.
yeah. Seth did a
Yeah.
really, really good video. It was honestly really, really like happy and surprised with it because I didn't get to see the video before it went out. I didn't have any say in it. Obviously, I'm not like paying him for anything because I just send him the product and he gets to try it. Like we talked a little bit during like before he tested it and then posted the video, but like I didn't even know when he posted the video. I just came across it.
Wow.
So like it was very, very hands off when it comes to how that video turned out and his going into the steering geometry and some things with that and stuff. Like I feel like he honestly did a really good job with this video. I was very pleased with how that turned out.
That's good. And then Pink Bike did one as well. I was watching that one earlier, where they were testing out the RR stem as well.
Mhm.
So you had some big hitters, get some attention to it, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's honestly really it's really exciting to me whenever I have a new review in the works. There is an interesting aspect I feel though of when I've had like some of the reviews that have come out, it'll tend to be a situation where there's these areas where they really like it or they see benefits, and then there's like one or two areas where they see a downside.
Okay.
That one or two areas where they see a downside, there are solutions for that. Sometimes very simple solutions that may just not be the most intuitive that I can like give tips for and suggestions for getting around those. The thing that's been a bit of a
That's a good
word. Frustration, if you will, for me a little bit
Sure.
is that, and I can understand why it is, but like the reviews are very hands off. So when I send out a product to whoever's doing a review,
Yeah, like
they get the
Seth
product.
or Lone Wolf.
Basically, they get the product, they try it, they post a review. And then at some point, either I find the review either pretty close to when they posted or not long after, because they don't typically tell me when they post it, and I have no like real input during the review or afterwards. And so because of that, there's a fully unbiased and uninfluenced aspect, which I respect and understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I take it that's probably the reason they're going for doing it like that, is so that they're fully like the brand who they're doing the review for had no say in or influence on this video.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the word? As such, like they're not going to like take anything out from the review or anything like that. Or
Right. They're not going to pull any punches. They don't owe anything. They just going to review it the way that they see it.
Yeah. So that's fine in large part, but I'd say does have the downside of that if the reviewer comes across an issue that they don't know how to get around, and then they post the review saying that the issue is with the product, it can sometimes be a situation where the issue is in how they use the product.
Mm.
So an example might be, this will be a somewhat more silly example, but let's say someone was using like a dropper post, like an Axis dropper post or something like that. And they got it, they installed it, they started using it, and it died in like 2 rides, let's say. And then they go for posting the review that the battery life only lasts for 2 days. I don't actually think that this specific example would happen, but let's just use it for ease. They say the battery died in 2 days, and so the battery life on this is really short, and that's a problem. That's fair. But the situation could have been that when they got it, it wasn't fully charged. And so the solution would have been that they needed to charge it more, and then they would have gotten the full battery life. Now, typically reviews are longer than that. So they would probably have gotten to a point where they start to charge it, and then they would see that then the full battery life. So I don't think that specific example would happen, but it kind of points to the idea. There can be situations where the reviewer doesn't know that there's a solution to the issue they're finding. And because they're not going and talking to the company about like, hey, I had an issue with this, they're not going to get an answer to that solution. Solution to that problem. And then they post the review with that issue as being an issue with the product when there was a solution.
Got it. Like the
so just
whole story is not seen type of thing.
In a sense.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, one of the reviews, the Lone Wolf, he did a great review. I feel like it was very well done in many ways. We had no big issues, but one of the things that he talked about, he said it was really good descending. He set a PR on it first run, and a KOM on a bike he'd never ridden before, and was going like a lot faster with it and consistently over multiple runs. We're setting PRs. And he said descending was really good. And cornering, he initially thought there might be some issues with traction with cornering and keeping like weight on the front wheel, but didn't have any issues with that. And the cornering was fine and feeling good. And climbing was fine. He felt like he was engaging his core a little bit more, being leaned over forward more. But otherwise, it wasn't really having any issues on climbs. Also for that, some changes for your seat angle and how you're moving, adjusting your angle of your arms so the bars can help with that core, a little bit more core engagement that he was having, but that's not the point. So all these things he's saying he's having a great experience with, but on tight turns seated, he was saying that he would hit his knee on the bar, and that was a deal-breaking thing for him and was a really big reason for why he wouldn't run it. So on a traditional stem, if your knee's in the wrong spot and you turn the bar, you can hit your knee on the stem. Sorry, you can hit your knee on the handlebar because the handlebar is coming closer to you on one side. And if you have your knee pointed, put this down some. If you have your knee pointed out more, then as you turn, you can hit. With the RR stem, the bars are closer, and so it can get to that intersection point easier. And I'll agree with that. That is possible. It certainly can happen. The solution is to move your knee to a different spot where it doesn't hit. And that's not hard to do. But I say typically, like if I'm, like let's say this is the stem on the bike here, my handlebars are kind of coming out like this. I have my knee coming up like this. My knee's pointed out like this. I turn the bar. If the stem's high enough, it'll actually go over your knee. Your hands will go over your knee, which is fine. But if they're at a height where they're gonna hit, that can happen. The solution is just point your knee in towards the stem, and then now that clearance there is good.
Yeah,
and you can turn it further even, all the way till where the handlebar would be able to like come to like all the way towards you. And so that was the main deal-breaking issue. The solution is just moving your knee. That's not hard to do.
Yeah, it's like a new geometry, new product. You just got to get used to it. You know, probably only ridden it a couple times.
Like your muscle memory is handlebar is in this spot, my knee's in this spot, and I know how to make them not intersect because they can intersect with a traditional stem. That's not impossible. It's just that you know where your handlebar typically is. You know where your knee needs to be to not intersect. And if you're used to the handlebar being roughly in the same spot over the entirety of the time you've been riding, which it typically has been in roughly the same kind of spot relative to your knee, then you know by muscle memory where your knee would need to be. And
Exactly.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Handlebars in a different spot, knee needs to be in a different spot.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
if you're not willing to go for making that change, or it's too hard for you to make that muscle memory change, I'll accept that. That's fine. Either run the stem taller so it goes over your knee, or go for running a traditional stem, if that's a change that is really hard for you to go for making for your riding style. But I wouldn't say that that's a very hard change to make. And most of my customers have no issue with knee clearance.
Yeah.
A lot of them, either their knee goes under the stem because they're running it tall enough for their height versus running it all the way low for a tall rider, or they know to move their knee. And
Yeah.
if they were riding it for longer, they'd probably figure that out too.
Exactly. Kind of goes here with Beyond X says, goes along with what you said about approaching setup like a new bike geometry. Train the body too.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And in that same way, like these changes to make, they're not hard changes to make or complicated changes to make. This handlebar is in a different spot. Just move your knee to a different spot. You can still pedal just fine with your knee pointed more in, or you can even point your knee further out so that the handlebar sweeps into the inside from your knee of your leg, if your bars aren't like super, super wide.
Speaking of making, Bronson, as far as actually making it, Trail Pimp is asking, do you machine this thing yourself? Are these made in SoCal like a place like Better Bolts?
In a sense, yeah. So I work at a manufacturing company, and so I do all the CAD, I do all the design. I work at the manufacturing company. I work with the manufacturing team to get the machine programmed. So they're 5-axis CNC machined on DMG Mori. If for anyone who's into machining, if they know about that one, it's a good one. So they're 5-axis CNC machined in Covina, California. And then
Covina.
I'm the
Okay,
operator.
cool. Nice. Locally
So,
made. Gosh,
yeah.
so many companies in SoCal.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And, so I even have some pictures on the Instagram you may be able to find if you scroll down enough. But like these are made at the manufacturing company I work at. These are made at the manufacturing company I work at. All the pieces of them are made there. What it is this starts as a solid block of 70-75 T6 grade aluminum, which is an aerospace a grade that's often used in aerospace because of its higher tensile strength and greater fatigue properties versus say 60-61. So yeah, so that's at the that's my hand that's holding this down.
Nice.
But yeah, so this starts as a solid block. Yeah, it probably might be some images lower on the Instagram than that one, where you can actually even see it like in the machine. But yeah, so it starts as a solid block, and we machine it down from multiple different angles, the 5-axis, until we get to this solid piece here. The top piece here is also made from the same material, and is also been machined from from a solid block. So that's actually this one. This it would be facing this direction, and as it is right there.
Wow.
And those little holes are holes that we use to hold the part as it's being machined. So the tool comes in and is machining out material, and then it like turns and then it machines from different angles and stuff. So it's a really high quality material that we're using. It's 70-75 T6511 as the specific heat treatment for anyone who knows about that. Which I believe just means it's stress relief. So the solid block, along with the heat treatment, that heat treatment makes it stronger, and then the it gives a little bit better fatigue life. Than the 511 specification, I believe, was for it being stress relief, so that because when you're looking at a solid block of metal, inside the material, it can be like experiencing subtle forces, twisting it in different ways. Okay. And so especially you'll see this if you're machining things like really, really thin walls. At some points, you can get to a point where it starts to like like maybe you machine off like a really thin piece, you take that piece out, and then it kind of is like this because there were internal stresses within the material. And
Interesting.
so just making sure that you're machining carefully can help with, and taking your time as you're machining something can help with making those internal stresses not affect your tolerances that much. But if you can go for having one that has less internal stresses already, that's beneficial towards a more precise part. So we machine these to really high tolerances in Covina, California. So you're getting, like, one of the things I like to say, like when you're looking at this for the price, it's because it's an expensive product relative to the price of the product it's taking up. Like this one is $500 and this one is $400. It costs that much because it kind of has to, because of the cost of making it. Yeah, there again. They start as a solid block, the 7075 2-degree material. Aluminum is the more expensive aluminum because it's a stronger and higher tensile strength than 6061, for example, that mountain bike frames tend to be made of. You can't weld it though, and that's why frames tend not to be made of this unless you're looking at, say, pole where they're machining the frame and then gluing in. That's why they're gluing it, is because you can't weld it. Because 7075 gets, I think it gets like really brittle if you try to weld it or something like that. But basically, it's not weldable functionally. 6061 though is very weldable, and same with 70005 aluminum, a couple other 7000 series aluminums. But anyways, that's not the point. Sorry, I'm getting into the weeds a bit.
No. It's interesting.
But so the material's more expensive. There's a lot of machine time because there's a lot of material that we're taking out for having it be one solid piece. And just the labor time and everything. But if you're looking at the stems, typically, let's say a stem typically can be between roughly like $30 and $200 rough range. Like a really high quality stem might be like $200. More typical stem might be around like $100. Lower end stem might be like $30 or something like that. Rough numbers. With this, if you're looking at the really high end stem, the things you're paying for in that really high end stem are quality of manufacturing for the tolerances that they're able to keep, and quality of the piece, and quality of the material. 7075 had to be lugged and not welded, but it is way nicer alloy. Exactly. Yeah. You can't weld 7075, and that's so if you're making a frame out of 7075, you either need to go for lugs for the frame, so you have tubes and then lugs, or which Pole is doing and a couple other companies are doing, where you have like a clamshell, where you have one half of the frame and the other half of the frame, almost like you cut a frame in half, like down the center line, and then you glue the two sides together, and they use a really high quality glue for that process, so that you get a part that's still really strong and holds together well.
That's
and that process in the aerospace industry is not too uncommon as far as using 7075 and then going for gluing it. As far as like for structural components, that's pretty normal. But anyways, for these though, I'm not doing any gluing it. They're just one solid piece. How can you find me on socials? BeMoreBikes.com is the website, and at BeMoreBikes, you can actually, because I have my shirt on, I think you can see on the back here.
Yeah, there you go. RR Raised Reversed Ride Revolution.
Yeah.
At BeMoreBikes or BeMoreBikes.com is where you can find Bronson in that product. Mountain Bike Q&A is saying, this kid's amazing. Meanwhile, I'm in the backyard behind the shed eating crickets.
I mean, crickets are high in protein. I won't shame it.
That's true. That's true. Teddy Parker is saying, running back and forth between the kitchen to start dinner and this podcast because his product is so interesting.
Oh,
yeah, very good. Very good. Atherton is doing Lugged, another bike company. There you go.
Yeah, so they're newer frame. I don't remember for sure if the tubes are doing 7075 or not. I think they are though. But yeah, they're newer frame. They're doing lugged and CNC lugs, CNC aluminum lugs, and then the tubes in between them. and they're doing that for aluminum, because previously they were doing their 3D printed titanium lugs, and then the carbon fiber tubes for their frames. But their newer models, I think, are going alongside that model as being like a slightly less expensive version made of aluminum. But yeah, I love mountain bikes. I love learning about everything I can when it comes to mountain bike technology, and especially frames. Like, my plan ultimately is making frames, and making frames around this geometry philosophy, along with my suspension design.
Gotcha. That's the next chapter.
Yeah. Actually, I
Man,
currently have a frame ordered from, there's a company called Merino in Peru. They do like custom steel frames for single pivot or hardtails. And they do like really, really good prices when it comes to custom frames. And what's the word? I ordered a custom geometry frame from them. I'm going for having it be a mullet. So 29 in the front, 27.5 in the rear, with 180 millimeters travel front and rear, and somewhat high pivot, single pivot with a gearbox, and my geometry philosophy. And I'm really excited about that. And if that frame works as I intend it to, as far as building a frame around the stem. So like, one of the things for it has a really, really long head tube. Like, most head tubes on frames are like 100 to 120. This one's using a 180 millimeter head tube on the front, because I'm going to use the short version of the stem on top, so the height's built into the frame. And then, along with some other geometry tweaks and a much longer chainstay length, because I think that gives better weight distribution front to rear when your weight's at the bottom bracket. And I'm really excited for that. I just today got an email from them saying that it's almost ready. And so I'm like super excited about that. That's gonna be great. But so I think someone asked about my suspension design. Basically, it's yeah. So my linkage design, it's a 4-bar linkage. So in a sense, similar to, like, if you're looking at like VPP or DW link, where it's the little kind of the shorter links, and then you'll have a rear triangle. That said, it is not a linkage arrangement like anything else that's currently out there. So one of the key features, for example, for my suspension design, key focuses, I should say, I was really focused on reducing the unsprung mass, and increasing the sprung mass. So when it comes to my linkage design, it looks kind of like just a swing arm, and then a couple links extending from it in some different spots. But I went for making that as small as I could to reduce how much material is needed there. That way I can reduce weight and have less unsprung mass. Along with that, some other things with how I'm bracing it to allow for tuning flex characteristics and things. And then it has a floating brake arm to get the anti-rise characteristics I was looking for. It has an idler for getting the anti-squat characteristics I was looking for, and reduction in pedal kickback that I was looking for, where I'm able to get it like within 1 degree for the entirety of the travel. And then it's not linkage driven. It's so the shock actually is driven from the swing arm. It makes more sense if you see it, but not ready for showing it publicly just yet. But one of the really key things with it, reduction in unsprung mass, and the axle path, instead of following like most do an arc, where if you're looking at a single pivot, it's a perfect like segment from a circle. It's a perfect arc. If you're looking at basically any dual length that's on the market currently, there'll be some version of multiple arcs kind of put together, because it's not following from a single arc, or a single pivot point. It's following from a floating pivot point, in a sense. It's just like, if you look at VPP, that stands for virtual pivot point, because there's basically the way the links are working together kinematically gives you at any instant, your single point in the travel, there'll be a single point that it's effectively pivoting from. But that point is changing as it moves through the travel. And as such, you're getting slight variations in the curve, where maybe it'll be more curvature initially and then less towards the end, or something like that, or vice versa. less initially and more towards the end, which is a little bit more common. That way they're reducing pedal kickback more at the end. But anyways, so it's one of the links actually changes direction partway through the travel, because I see the person's asking, is it two counter-rotating links on a 4-bar? So one of the links actually changes direction partway through the travel.
Whoa.
Roughly, I don't know, 30% of the way through the travel. But that's not really a huge part of it, that the link changes direction. More so, I'm getting with it, I'm getting a very, very straight axle path, like within 0.5 millimeters of a perfectly straight line. And as such, I can look at it more as that, like as a straight line, what angle that line is at. So I have mine where that angle of that straight line that it's able to follow with my linkage is tilted back at an angle of 15 degrees. Because I found that works well in my virtual simulations. There's a program that I use called Algodo, where I'm able to draw a side view of the bike, and I'm able to input my like linkage points, and then make a rider to basically, like almost like a game, ride the bike across like a trail that I make, or like a course or track that I make in the program. And then with that, I'm able to change characteristics of the suspension and see how much speed the bike loses in rough terrain as it's going over bumps, or how it responds to different kinds of inputs for bottom out resistance and things like that, and different damping characteristics. And I really love doing that. I've spent so many years doing that because I just love it. But I've gotten to a point where my linkage design is performing how I want it to, and is getting a lot of the characteristics I was looking for. I'm actually really quite happy with what I was able to get as far as the kinematics of it. And so that's a little further down the line, because first I have to prove the geometry is working how I want it to for building a frame around this stem. And then once I know that that's working, then it's starting prototyping on incorporating that geometry with a frame that's using my suspension design, and fine-tuning that in real-world testing as far as stiffness characteristics and flex characteristics and damping rates. And I'm really excited about when I can get to that. But that's definitely still a little ways down the line. For now, it's just stems.
Man, Bronson, that's awesome, man. I think in closing, this is a perfect question to ask you. It's from Mountain Bike Q&A out in Miami. He's saying, what was it like to see what you dreamed up come to be? How's that feel?
So great. It's such a great feeling. It's really surreal because like I designed on my computer, and I went through multiple iterations of like getting to this. Like there were versions before the R's or things like that, and before that it was the testing different versions, different geometries in the real world before I got to settling on this geometry. And then I can run spacers above or below the steer tube here. It's one of the other things that's a key feature, that you can put your steer tube comes out through here, and you can still run spacers above or below, even though the offset would otherwise have your bars intersect your steer tube, because it's above it. Yeah. There's room to run spacers in there. So you can still adjust the height, and I don't know what height you're going to want. So I added that as a specific feature, because you might want it lower than I run it. I run mine with 30 millimeters below it to bring it taller. And I'm 5'8". Someone who's shorter than me may want to run less spacers, or someone who just prefers a lower front end may want to run less spacers, or even want to run the shorter version. But anyways, like I went through, once I got to this geometry, I went through multiple versions on my computer to get to this actual like piece, like versions even before I had the R's on it. Or versions before I designed a way to have this window in here, or versions before I had the spacers, because you can run 31.8 millimeter bar with the spacers, or 35 millimeter bar without the spacers. So you can run either bar size, because again, I don't know what bar size you're going to be needing to run. So you can run whatever bar size you want, and then going for running simulations on them for FEA, for seeing that they're strong enough, and that they're meeting the strength and fatigue requirements based on some of the standards that are out for mountain bikes. So I don't remember what the number is offhand, but there's a certain code for like what strength requirements mountain bike stems need to have. And so I went for running virtual simulations for FEA on how I could on how strong the stem would be for the fatigue requirements that it needs to have, and the strength requirements that it needs to have, and making sure it's exceeding those notably, so that it's not likely to be breaking when someone's riding it.
Right.
And then getting that to production version, and then actually having that made, making this like this was it's very, very fun for me, but it's very surreal, like seeing this on the computer and seeing this in your hand and then seeing this on your bike and then riding with it. It's a great feeling. It's a very, very good feeling. I would recommend it, would do it again, will continue to do it.
That's awesome. I look forward to seeing everything that you're putting out. I can't wait for the next chapter to come out. Sounds like it's really close. So that's going to be amazing to see a frame built around all of this thought. And I heard the 15 again. 15 seems to be the magic number when we're looking at the design and the geometry. So that's going to be exciting. There's a lot of people here in the audience that is interested too. Captain's Cog saying, I want a top load MTB stem that has a rise like a BMX stem does. Trail Pimp, he's saying he wants to jump in and learn suspension design in CAD. Like you're motivating folks.
X3, I'd recommend that program for learning about the kinematics.
Which one was it again?
Version for like hobbyist, I guess you could say. Right, I think it's a free version. It's either that or it might be like $30 or something like that. It's not expensive, and you can install it on your computer, and you can go for either putting in points to analyze kinematics, or you can go for looking at frames that exist and their suspension characteristics and comparing them, or making your own.
Well, what was the software again, Bronson?
Linkage X3.
Linkage X3.
If you just look up linkage or linkage design software for mountain bikes, you should be able to find it pretty quickly. But I believe it's called Linkage X3, and that one's used by a lot of different companies too. It's pretty standard in the industry. So like sometimes if you know like what the graphs look like or what the program looks like, if you see like a drawing up from a company for what their suspension design looks like or what the kinematics are, it might be even from that program.
Very cool. For the folks that are listening on iTunes, oh, go ahead, Joey.
Oh, Mark, I just wanted to thank Bronson for thinking outside the box and pushing the envelope. I mean, if there weren't people in the world like Bronson, we'd all be stuck on hardtails with no dropper post and cage pedals. And I mean, he's pushing the envelope and he's only making our sport better. So thank you.
Totally.
I appreciate
so
that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the folks that are listening to the podcast, wherever you are downloading this, Bronson, is there a way that people can contact you to demo the stem if they're curious about trying it?
Yeah. So particularly if you're in, so I live in Crenshaw in California, kind of near in Los Angeles. I make these in Covina, California. If you're local to like SoCal, especially the LA area, even like up to like an hour and a half drive outside of there, roughly. I'll meet you at a trail that you know, and I'll install it on your bike, and I'll set your bike up for you for some of the changes. For like one of the things, for example, with this, since you're riding a lot more weight through the bottom bracket, versus sometimes riders go like weight through their hands and weight through the feet. All your weight through your feet, you're putting less weight on the front. Subsequently, if your fork is set up for when you have weight on the front, it's going to be a little bit too stiff when you don't have weight on the front. So reducing your fork pressure can be one of the things that can really help. I even had one person who went for demoing the stem. I reduced his fork pressure by 50% because his fork was way too stiff. particularly for the stem. Had he left it that stiff, he'd end up with something that feels really rear biased, where like if you bounces on the bike should go down even front and rear when you bounce at your feet at the bottom bracket. If it's going back heavy, that means your fork is too stiff or your shock is too soft. It should be pretty balanced. You should always be seeking for a fairly balanced, if not ever so slightly rear biased, I'd say. Yes, but like I'll go for setting up your bike for making that change. I'll go for adjusting your front tire pressure. You can go for lower front tire pressure than you would typically, because again, you're not putting as much weight on it, so it doesn't need to be as stiff to keep from like bottoming the tire or keep it from rolling. And then if you run a lower tire pressure, you'll just get better traction, and that's good. You can also run a firmer rear tire pressure, so that way your rear doesn't squirm too much if you're loading it a lot, because you may be loading it a lot more. You may want to adjust your seat position, either a little bit further forward or back, but more so to the point, I'd say tilting the angle forward more, so you're more nose down. And that's really good for steep climbing, getting that position. And I'll also go for adjusting your bar roll for what works well with your body position and the new angle that you're at on the bike. Adjusting your brake lever angle if we need to from that bar position, depending on what roll you end up at, and adjusting the spacers up or down from where the stem is installed and also seeing whether or not you should be on the short version or the tall version. And I do all of that for demos. Demos are free.
Very cool. And how do they contact you again for a demo? Would it be through Instagram?
Instagram, my website. My website has my email. My website has my phone. The number for my phone is my personal cell number. Call, text anytime. And I'm very much. I really love doing demos. It's a lot of fun for me.
I bet.
Because I love learning about setups and adjusting setups and tuning bikes. And when I can get someone to a ride characteristic that is better than what they had before, that makes me really happy.
Nice.
So if you are interested in trying it, please reach out. I would love to go on a ride. Going on rides in general is fun, and it's even more fun for me when tuning is a part of it and testing is a part of it. So I would love to do that, and even if it's a place I've never been before, that just means I get to ride a new trail. So that's also great. So it's kind of all wins for me.
Love it.
And if you're not local, like if you're outside of SoCal area, still reach out. We may be able to go for either arranging a way to have the stem shipped to you so you can try it out. I typically, for that kind of arrangement, like to do it as if you're interested in trying to buy it, then you can go for buying it now. And when you get the stem, if you find for whatever reason you don't like it, you can send it back and you get a refund. If it comes back like pretty scratched up, there might be a restocking fee of I forget what the restocking fee is offhand. I think I was doing 10%, but I need to check, so don't quote me on the number. But what's the word? In that situation, if you're looking to try it, to buy it, if you try it and you find that you don't like it, you can do a refund, and it's kind of no harm, no foul. You just pay for shipping. But during that, like again, I'm here to talk to, like over phone, for getting you set up and making sure everything's working as best as it can for your experience with the stem. And if you find that we can't get to a setup that works better for you, then send it back and you get your refund. That's fine.
Nice. Okay.
When it comes to how long it takes to get set up, because I think someone asked about that, a ride, really, if you're like diligent with it, because seeing if the front or rear is notably too soft or stiff is pretty easy, because you get on the bike and you bounce, and if the rear compresses notably more than the front, then your front either needs to go softer or your rear needs to go stiffer. You just adjust the fork softer until it's even, or the rear stiffer until it's even, or vice versa, or both. Sometimes I'd say typically you're adjusting your fork softer, but sometimes you can adjust your shock a little stiffer too. It just depends on your riding style. That'll at least get you to a good starting point. You can fine tune from there. As far as getting the height for spacers, that's easy because you just put the spacers above or below. And if you're a taller rider, you can always start with it low and then put it taller. If you put it too tall, you can always put it lower. It's like I advise not being afraid to experiment, because you never learn if you don't experiment. And you may
True.
find a much better setup than you were initially expecting by trying something new.
True.
Along with that too, adjusting for bar roll is really quick, because what I do is a tip here is, if you have the bar installed here and you run your bolts just tight enough so that the bar isn't loose but can still be like turned.
Mm-hmm.
Something you can go from doing is get into like your riding position and you'll pull on the bars. And if you roll them notably forward, they're going to pull into a position. When you do that, you roll them back, you do that same thing, you pull, they're going to pull into a position, because there's a certain angle that your wrist is at in your comfortable position for like your kind of like riding position. And there's a certain, that angle that your wrist is at, the bar is going to adjust to whatever's closest to that angle when you go for pulling it from either being rolled forward or rolled back. If you go for doing both, then you just take the middle point between the two of them, and that should be at least a very good starting point for bar roll. That works for either traditional stem or with the RR stem. But in that sense, like, adjusting the bar roll is very quick. Adjusting the brake lever angle is quick, because once you know that, get that roll, then you just see like where your fingers end up comfortably, and you put them there. Adjusting the seat angle, the seat height stays the same. The seat angle can potentially be a bit more finicky, but I'd say bias towards more nose down, generally speaking, with the stem, for if you're climbing steeper terrain. That way you can scoot forward on the stem and be lower down on it. That way your weight's not getting too far back. Tire pressures, I'd say probably go roughly 5 psi difference between front and rear. So if you're running, say, 20 in the front, 25 in the rear, I'd say is a pretty good starting point. Or if you're running like 28 in the rear, then like 22 in the front, or like roughly like a 5 psi difference front to rear is a pretty good starting point. And when you're riding it, things to feel. If you feel like you're noticing your tires hitting your rim a lot, or you feel like your tires squirming a lot, then you're too low. If you're not feeling any squirm and you're not noticing the tire hit the rim at all, then you might be a little too high. You can actually go lower. But all of these things are, they're not fundamentally, I would say, that hard to do. It's just, I guess, knowing to do them. And if you know to do them, then they don't take that long.
Yeah.
At least for getting to like a good baseline to start with, that'll get you on the right track. And then you can fine tune from there if you find like any further things, like for example, if you're, when I said like the adjusting your suspension balance, like if you're changing air pressure, that will effectively change your rebound speed, because there's the rebound is the only thing that's extending the suspension is the spring pushing back. If the spring is softer pushing back, then it's going to push back with less force, and subsequently will rebound slower for a given setting. And so you may, if you're running like a substantially lower pressure than you were before, a faster rebound setting to balance with that will be a good idea. Or if you're running a substantially higher pressure, a slower rebound setting to match with that can be a good idea. But what's the word? if you're making a relatively small change to start with, you shouldn't need to make any big changes to your damping settings unless you find that it's feeling too slow or too fast. And that's something you can fine tune over time should you need to. And that's just in the same way as I was saying earlier, like it's more akin to a new bike where you're working on setting that bike up and getting adjusted to that bike and getting it adjusted for you than it is just a stem change.
Yes.
If setting up a bike from the start is something that is either really difficult for you or something that you're not that comfortable with, this product may not be for you. Or talk to me and I'll work on getting you set up, and just be willing to work with me, and I'll work with you.
Nice.
For taking your feedback of what you're feeling in the setup and making suggestions. So I've done that with multiple customers that I've had, where maybe they're feeling like I'm having a little bit of an issue here, or I'm having a little bit of an issue there, and then I'll make suggestions of tweaks they can make to either their setup or their technique that will help with getting rid of that issue either entirely or helping to manage that issue. Such that then they're not really having that be an issue and are just getting benefits, the benefits that they were seeking to have, which is the point I was getting at earlier with reviews. That's the part that's kind of hard, is when reviewers aren't coming back with feedback of things they're feeling, then I can't help direct them on the solutions. And if they don't get the solutions, then they may think that it's just because it's an issue with the stem, when it could just be an issue with either the setup that they're running with the stem. Fixing that setup would then fix the issue, and then they can just experience the positives that they were already experiencing without that downside, or adjustments to the technique. So again, they can experience the positives they were already feeling, but then without the downside.
That's awesome. No, definitely. Thank you, Bronson, so much. For the folks that are out there, if you guys want to demo it, check out Bronson on Instagram at BeMoreBikes, or go to BeMoreBikes.com and find Bronson's email there, contact him. Sounds like one of the best ways to really, see if this product is for you is to actually jump on it and feel it for yourself. We definitely covered a lot of science behind it today. Sure. A lot of geometry, a lot of numbers. And if you're not a numbers person, but you're more of a feel person, what feels right, jump on it. I actually jumped on a BMX bike today just to sit on one. And with that higher rise, I was like, I wonder if this is a smidgen of what it would feel like to be on an RR stem. So, we all started there at one point in time in our life, and we definitely had a good time there. So, Bronson, thank you again so much for jumping on the Segment Podcast. Thank you for pushing the envelope in our sport. I love it. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah, thank you. I did have one last thing, if there's a little time. I wanted to say, with the testing, when I was doing with the stem for time testing, when I was doing the back-to-back runs, saying it's I can do run to run like plus minus a second, but typically like on the same within milliseconds of run to run, like consistency. I was consistently about 10 to 15 seconds faster with the RR stem than I was with the traditional stem over about 3 minutes.
Wow.
And that's part of what I really based my testing off of, was what's giving me faster times and more control. So to me, this product is fully about performance and making the bike ride calmer, safer, and with more control, so you can ride faster and have more fun. It does help with comfort, but that's not the only goal. To me, it's really targeted towards racing, and making the bike handle a lot better so you can ride a lot faster.
Love it. I
Nice.
love it. Dang, super cool. So yeah, again, for the folks out there, check out Bronson at BeMoreBikes on Instagram as well as BeMoreBikes.com and increase those times. Check it out. Beyond
Right.
X right here, closing us out 8% faster. And faster is faster when you're splitting seconds
Yep.
between the tape. Thank you all again so much for joining us on the Segment Podcast. Thank you, Bronson. And we'll see you guys all in the next episode. Bye for now. See you on the trails. Shoo-hoo.